Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a special board meeting for a workshop on our budget. Anyone that is tuning in can follow us along on the internet at www.youtube.com/user/GoEPCC. Okay, I want to welcome everyone and call this meeting to order. Bell, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Mendez. Mrs. Robles.
Here, present.
Dr. Graham.
Here.
Mr. Haggerty. Here. Mr. Uxer and Ms. Nájera are running a little bit late, and Ms. Pina will not be joining us.
Okay. Well, I wanted to get started because everyone's here, so. Open forum, anybody for open forum?
There is none, sir.
Okay. Number 5, discussion. Go ahead and read 5.1, Bell.
Item 5.1, Mr. Fernando Flores, Vice President of Finance and Administration, Chief Financial Officer, will provide an update on the budget development process for fiscal year 2024-2025.
Okay. You're on.
Chair Haggerty, members of the board, Dr. Serrata, thank you for the opportunity to present the next budget development workshop. This is towards finalizing the El Paso Community College operating budget for fiscal year 24-25. The next slide will show some of the main elements that we're going to cover today. Recall that on June 21st, we had a budget development workshop. That workshop, many of the revenues were very preliminary. We didn't have the no new revenue rate, the appropriation rules making committee had not certified the rules for next year, and we were pretty far away still from the fall enrollment, which speaks to the tuition and fees revenue that we project. So for today, we're using a baseline budget updated as of June 30th, 2024. And then we will provide you with an update to revenues for the current year, 23-24, and then for 24-25. And we have ongoing review of the additional funding requests. We have provided additional workshops with the vice presidents towards evaluating the additional funding requests. The team of Ms. Ana Zuniga, Laura Tejas, and myself met with the VPs and provided them some different options for evaluating their additional funding requests. And as a result of that, some of the vice presidents have had some significant cuts to the additional funding requests. But we'll see the new numbers shortly, and there is still ongoing review of those additional requests. Then, because we have updated revenues and baseline budget, then that has resulted in a revised funding strategies that are based upon updated revenue projections. We have now updated the 4-year model with this information as well. Then we'll talk about the next steps towards budget adoption. So for the current year, the first column depicts the operating budget for 23-24. The middle column projects the revenues for this year. And we went over this on June the 21st, but these are updated numbers now. And it's important to have updated numbers because that becomes the basis for projecting out the revenues for 24-25. So appropriation still has a positive variance of 3.3 million. Yes, sir?
Just say, Dr. Stone, at what point is it, like I have a question on projected revenues, but are we going to go through that in a little bit more detail so it'll be an interactive question later? Or when's the best time to ask questions?
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Right now is a good time.
Okay, the projected revenues, now this is based on a new allocation model. Is this on the new appropriations model?
That is correct, Mr. Uxer. It's based on the outcomes-based model that went into effect as a result of House Bill 8 in the last legislative session.
Okay, and if I remember, you were conservative. You took a real conservative approach to what we're looking at now. In other words, at 44.0, is probably middle to conservative type estimate, is that?
It's pretty accurate. We have much more information this year than we had last year. For instance, we know what our outcomes were last year. We're projecting our outcomes based on last year. What is different on this is the FAST, or the Financial Aid for Swift Transfer Resources. Those last year were estimated to be at $2 million for the institution. That was the state estimate that they had provided to us. The actual was a little over $5 million. And so we have adjusted the budget accordingly. And so it is much closer this year on projections than it was last year.
If it's on projection, now I'll ask you your wizard hat. Is this plus or minus 0.1 million? Isn't it plus or minus 100,000 or plus or minus 1 million, or sort of? Or can you put a bracket on it? Conservative, I mean.
Conservatively, I'd say that it's probably plus or minus $1 million. And it depends on our outcomes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, I'm just curious, since we have a new algorithm to project that, okay? So we're looking anywhere from 43 to 45, good enough.
So we're going to have a similar slide for 24-25 projected revenues in a little bit. So these revenues are through 10 months out of the year. So these are pretty solid projections for the current year. So moving down the rows here, overhead recovery has a small increase of $30,000. Under local funds, tuition and fees are coming in above budget by about $1.5 million, or 3.93% higher than budgeted. Yes, sir?
Okay. What is the population, the student tuition paying population this year versus in our projection? In other words, are we projecting more people, and where does that fit in the last 3 years?
So our revenue projections are conservative. We base the ensuing budget year based upon the current activity level. So we are going to base the 24-25 budget conservatively.
No. I'm looking 23-24 projected revenues, you have tuition fees.
Yes, sir.
And that depends on how many students you have. So that number of students, that's what it is. Property taxes, we get that from there. I understand what are the elements behind tuition fees. How many students are we projecting compared to what we have this year?
For next year, we're budgeting the same number of students.
Okay, that's what I want to know. So we're budgeting the same, and we're just saying that we're going to see, if we're budgeting the same, and we're going to increase $1.5 million, where's the extra money coming from?
That's a great question. So one of the things we do when we look at this particular revenue item, because of our dashboard, we can pull enrollment for the fall. Right now, enrollment for the fall is up 3%, or 599 students year over year.
So then this tuition, the attendance is going to be a little bit more next year than this year.
If that trend continues, then it will be higher. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
so we're not using the same, we're using more students. You just said a minute ago it's the same, but now we're using a little bit more.
We're gonna use the 23-24 numbers because we're budgeting conservatively. We still have a ways to go before fall tuition completes. We have a large drop period where students that may have not paid have the opportunity to drop. But right now, strictly on enrollment, it is trending 3% higher.
Okay, I've used enough of your time. Go ahead, sorry.
It's okay. So, property tax revenue for the current year is 2.3 million positive variance, higher than the prior year. And those revenues are primarily received in December, January, and February, so we feel very comfortable about this number. And other income, we're trending $6.9 million higher, largely a reflection of interest rate environment that we are currently in. So that is a very large variance. We're going to see on the next projection slide where we're still budgeting very conservatively for interest income, because that is not a good item to build a sustainable budget on. But right now, this year, it's trending $6.9 million higher than what is budgeted. So as we go down the projected revenues, at the very bottom, we wind up with projected revenues for this year, $170,817,221, compared to a budget of $158,154,190, producing a positive variance of $12,663,031, or 8.01% higher than what was budgeted. So all in all, it looks very healthy. So this slide shows how we're doing this year. This considers projected revenues and then projected expenditures. And in one slide shows how we see the year ending. So on the previous slide that we just showed, we finished with $170.8 million in projected revenue for this year. You see that amount at the top right here. It's our beginning revenue number, same number. So we project out that our expenditures for this year will end at $139,988,633, resulting in a budget surplus of $30.8 million. So this is available for increasing our fund balance, or using for capital projects or deferred maintenance, is what happens to this surplus. So all in all, the year is ending in a very positive manner. Yes, sir.
Same question again as before. Why do we project vacancies if we're not, if we're going to project savings? Why don't we get rid of the vacancies or fund them and get people?
No, they are funded, Mr. Uxer.
I know they're funded, just nobody's there to take the money.
Well, it is, there's a couple of things. So I'd remind the board that during the pandemic, we froze a significant number of positions in order to protect the college. We didn't know that the federal government was going to provide the kind of resources that they did in 3 tranches that amounted to $122 million. We have slowly begun to advertise positions as the enrollment has bounced back. And there's some areas that are more difficult to recruit in than others. I continue to work with the vice presidents on that, along with Ms. Field in HR and Human Resources, to try to adjust if we need to. In particular, IT has been somewhat of a challenge. Dr. Smith and nursing faculty has been a challenge. We take those on a case-by-case basis. But you're right. So I'd say a couple of things. This isn't just positions. This is a significant amount of resources. We had set the budget at 158. We ended up bringing 170 million. So that's 12 million of that surplus there. And then the other 18 million were institutional positions, not just budgeted positions, but you see the part-time faculty. Almost $3 million. Dr. Smith will hire adjunct faculty as sections demand. And we have reduced that over time. I'm leery of reducing it and being too tight on the budget, that if we see a significant growth of enrollment, we wouldn't be able to fund the faculty needed.
Just as a concept approximation, how many vacancies, if the people are available, how many vacancies would we fill right now? If we have projected vacancies?
I'd be lying if I had a straight up answer for you. I'd have to look at the data harder and estimate that. So,
How many vacancies do we have in nursing and IT? Those are the 2 that seem to be the problem. I don't see Dr. Mitchell here, but is the guy here for IT?
no. Mr. Fernandez is not here. Dr. Smith is here and can reference,
I can answer the nursing question, I certainly can answer the IT question. So we're about 3 positions short of nursing, but that's having onboarded 7 new ones for this upcoming fall semester.
So we're only missing 3 for nursing.
So what we see is the turnover of nursing. So we're constantly in the process where we're advertising. We never get enough applicants to fill all the positions in nursing.
So you have 7, of which 3 are new and 4 you anticipate
We have
leaving.
7 new, 3 are still vacant.
so we had 10 positions that
Okay.
turned over, and we were able to fill 7 of those.
That's very good.
In IT, right now, we currently have in that entire division, so not all IT personnel, but we have 30 positions that are currently vacant in
30?
IT. Yeah, now, they're not
Out of
all
a total-
programmers.
Out of the total. What's the 100, 150?
In IT, yeah, there's probably 150 total staff members in IT.
Overall, there are 237 vacant positions. 237
Correct.
overall.
Okay, so is the problem the lower paying, or is the problem that,
So sometimes the problem is the salary, sometimes. Right now, we continue to see a very tight labor market in the general El Paso area. We see it in the entire state of Texas. So, when you're seeing an unemployment rate of less than 5%, it's a tight market.
Are we looking short certificated or degree personnel or both?
So, both. Now, in IT specific, Mr. Uxer, Ms. Field is working with Mr. Fernandez. The state reduced the requirement for their own programmers and passed a law that allows us to look at certifications. They reduced it from baccalaureate degrees to associate degrees, so we in turn are doing the same. And we're trying to build our own. I've had Mr. Fernandez working not only with Ms. Field, but Dr. Servin and Dr. Smith's area, who is mentoring many of these programmers that are coming through our own ranks and trying to get a funnel, if you will, of our own students that complete their degrees and certifications, trying to get them to stay with us. We know long-term, we may not be able to keep them for their entire careers, but it is an opportunity for us to cultivate our own student body.
Well, I will say this, since we had the attempted hack in there, I've had the opportunity to talk to several of the people, and all of them are graduates or function, and they're very good.
Yeah.
I like what Mr. Fernandez and Marco was doing, so they're good. So your job is to keep them.
That's right. That's right.
But that requires higher salaries. So you're not gonna keep them on your good looks.
Well, I wouldn't keep anyone on my good looks, Dr. Graham.
Oh, you did, Jessica?
Yeah, Jessica, yes. That's the only one. But you're right. And again, we continue to look at those and we'll continue to monitor those. I'm hesitant to say, we need a salary study for the entire institution, given the fact that we put that in place in 16. And I'd remind the board that the board has been incredibly generous to our staff, and over the last 4 years, not counting what we're going to recommend today, the board has given significant salary increases across the board to the institution. So we'll continue to work. I'll continue to work with Mr. Flores and Ms. Field, along with the vice presidents and cabinet members on those areas specific.
One question on nursing. I had the opportunity to view nursing ability firsthand the past couple of years. But I understand the concept of traveling nurse and overtime, that it appears that there's as much a problem in burnout as there is in money and hiring nurses. Do we see the same thing? I mean, you should see the money that the traveling nurses get.
I'm keenly aware of that. We saw a peak in the pandemic, right, for traveling nurses. We've seen that come down a little bit. I don't know that we see the burnout in nursing for our faculty. But certainly, many of our faculty also work in the hospitals on weekends. So we're aware that there's a high burnout rate for nursing faculty. The numbers that I mentioned earlier, by the way, were only for nursing faculty. We have just onboarded nursing lab assistants. We're also short a nursing physician's assistant, PA, to help run the clinic.
Do we really have any real solid plan, or do we just advertise and try and do the best we can right now?
Well, we do, and I don't want to get ahead of Bernie in the presentation, but that's part of the critical request is some relief for the nursing faculty.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
So the current year is going to end very healthy. So we're able to look at adding to fund balance, and then the difference adding to capital projects and deferred maintenance. The fund balance is very important because SAC-COC accreditation looks at our fund balance. Also, rating agencies look at our fund balance, and they did this past year. And they also look at a very similar chart to this, how our operations are going and how management is controlling the budget. So now we look ahead to planning for the 24-25 budget. So in planning for revenues, the second year of the following the 88th legislature, House Bill 8. And so the new rules have been adopted. They were adopted July 25th by the coordinating board. So that supports the appropriation number that we're going to present shortly in our projected revenues. And so the tuition and fees is based upon a tuition rate schedule effective fall 2024 and current year enrollment. No tuition rate increases planned for 24-25. We're keeping tuition the same, is what we're doing.
The two-year budget cycle of the House will be the 25, 26, and 26, 27.
Yeah. That's correct, Mr. Exler. The only caveat is we used to see our state appropriation remain stagnant for those 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now it changes year to year based on our outcomes.
Which are certificates and degrees.
Among others,
Certificate.
yeah.
So the property taxes, now, July the 25th, we received the certified taxable property valuation of $68.8 billion. And so Ms. Diaz has calculated the no new revenue rate, which has been confirmed also by the county. Thank you, Laura. And so it resulted in a no new revenue tax rate of 10.7786 cents per $100 valuation. Yes, sir?
How much is the 68.8 subject to exception, or, people want to apply for exemptions or adjustments?
So there are,
Is that real solid, or is this still, depending on
I would say that's a very, very solid
the, it's
number.
pretty well set?
It is.
They've got most of the filings.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep. So that $68.8 billion is an increase from 61.5 from the prior year. So city valuations have been climbing quite a bit, and so that was an increase of $7.3 billion in valuation. That's like an 11.8% year-over-year increase in valuations, which is very, very good for the city and all the taxing entities. So we have now the no new revenue rate, and so we can estimate our tax revenue, which we've done. And so planning for additional funding needs, consideration still to be made is consideration for salary enhancement of employees, and consider the additional funding request from executive levels. And also, we are going to consider the impact of the GASB 68 and 75 on unrestricted net position. We should get final numbers before by October 2024, right before we close our fiscal year. It's one of our last entries before we can close our year. So looking at the House Bill 8 funding model for fiscal year 2025, now that the rules have been certified on July the 25th, this is the amount that has been projected for El Paso Community College to receive to support our budget, $38,605,000 approximately. And so these, as you all well know, is based upon performance and some weighted outcomes developed for FY24. And so also part of that is the financial aid for SWIFT transfer called FAST. The projection here is based upon the enrollments that happened this year, 23-24. So Ms. Zuniga took those enrollments and projected out at the new increased rate of 56.87 cents per semester credit hour. It was $55 per semester credit hour. So that is how she arrived at the estimated 5.3 million that we expect to receive next year. And so we now know that our health insurance appropriation will remain at $7,003,732, and there's no change in the state contribution rate for TRS.
Question?
Yes, sir?
What's the faculty attitude toward health insurance? Good, bad, need to be improved? What do you hear from them?
Dr. Smith, would you weigh in on faculty and our health insurance?
So we do an institutional survey, and I don't know if Dr. Penn might be a better person to talk about the outcome of the survey, but our employees are generally very happy with their compensation package, other than the areas we spoke about earlier, and the working environment of the institution. I don't think we asked questions specific to health coverage.
Benefits in general.
Okay, but
Anecdotally, we have a lot of veteran employees who appreciate, that not only the coverage for themselves, but their family members.
But there's no rumblings that say, hey, we need to really look at this again or something. Okay.
No, and we haven't looked at that, Mr. Uxer, either with regards to, I know that what, possibly what you're referring to is, I hear a lot about the school districts and the shifting in insurance programs that they offer. We have not even considered that. We have not had any complaints that have risen to the level of us having any consideration of shifting.
So now we get to the revenue projections that will support the budget for 24-25. So we now have the appropriation numbers, and they total $44.1 million. Compared to the current operating budget, that's a variance of $3.4 million. And then we have a small increase in overhead recovery related to grants and contracts. On the local funds, tuition and fees, we project out $39.1 million in projected revenue for next year. That is basically flat. So if the trend for enrollment continues higher, that will be to our benefit. So that is what we do, building a conservative budget. Property tax revenue is projected to be at $73,087,258 based upon the no new revenue tax rate. So an increase of $2.9 million for property tax revenue. And we have built in a allowance of $1.6 million if the refunds are larger than expected. This number is conservative, and that's the way we've always built out the property tax revenue, with those considerations for allowances.
And the $3 million is due almost entirely to the $7+ billion tax, taxable.
New property,
New
that's
property.
correct, yes, sir.
Yes. Then under other income, we spoke about that on the 23-24 projected revenue, where interest income is very high. because of the high interest rates, but we budget interest income very conservatively. We budgeted $5 million for interest income. This year, it'll come in probably about 12 million, but the Fed rate is expected to be cut 50 basis points probably in September, followed by 25 basis point cuts the next ensuing 3 quarters. So it's trending. But really, it's an election year. There's a lot of variables. The economy is hard to predict, so we budget conservatively.
It's really dark.
So as we move down the projected revenue column, we are projecting out revenues for next year of 166.496516 in total revenue. That will be the budget for next year, because we're not going to exceed the revenues that we project. So largely, that will be the operating budget that we will work around. So that produced a variance compared to the current budget of 158 million, produced a positive variance of 8.3 million, or 5.27% higher than the current operating budget. So how is that revenue distributed? So understandably, property tax revenue is the highest. It's 73 million, representing almost 44% of the revenue pie, followed by appropriations at 44.1 million, or 26.5% of the revenue pie, followed by tuition and fees, and then other income, self-supporting, and overhead recovery. All together, that comprises the total revenue sources for the operating budget for next year. So, budget development has occurred, and the Budget Office has compiled all the executive level submissions for their budgets. And so Ms. Diaz and her team have worked to develop the baseline budget. So this is all the executive level submissions, adjusted for anybody that's retired or left the college, anybody leaving the college. This has resulted in a baseline budget of $157,228,302. It is $925,000 lower than the current operating budget of $158,154,000. The changes here are largely people that are vacating positions, leaving, and then the replacements coming in at entry level.
Okay, so that accounts for the 940. The elephant in the whole thing is the finance and administration.
That has another component to it that others do not. That has, that division administers a clearing account that is used to fund projects during the year that need to be funded. So there's about $746,000 that came out of a clearing account to fund projects during the year that Dr. Serrata approved in nursing or resource centers, things that happen during the year. So that is the movement out of the finance administration, and then those funds go back into other areas.
Well, you look at the whole thing, essentially the budget's the same, except for the increase year over year is essentially due to finance and administration. 925,000
It
versus
is.
946,000. So,
Yeah.
the decrease is what moving stuff out of that. Okay. So essentially, it's a flat budget.
That's correct.
So this slide then produced the baseline budget, which we will use on the next slide as we move forward. So we take the $157,228,302 baseline budget, and this is how that budget will be distributed if that were to be the budget. So the main functional areas in here, so instruction is largest at 55.2 million, or 35.16% of the baseline budget, followed by institutional support at 44.2 million, followed by academic support at $19.162 million, or 12.19%, followed by operations and maintenance, student services, public service, and research. And transfers is $7.5 million. So this is a distribution by functional areas. These are the categories that we're required to follow by NACUBO. This classification method by NACUBO,
Okay,
the National Association of College and University Business Officers.
okay.
So that is a source of gap for us. We have to follow that.
So
So
in other words,
this is
that's
a-
a prescribed, that's not something you just had to put together, you have a.
That's correct. And so what that does is your financials are laid out by these functional areas. Your budgets are laid out similarly. So it allows for comparability between community colleges. So that is why we distribute the baseline budget like this.
Do you look at this, if this, other community colleges have the same requirement, do you look at this versus?
We do. My comparison is usually the other large 10 colleges, Mr. Uxer. And so we do. Obviously, I'm very familiar with South Texas and the work that they did, having spent 16 years there. I don't only look at the budget, I look at tuition and fees as well as the tax rate, et cetera. I'd remind the board that all of this, including the surplus, is without a recommended tuition increase or a recommended tax increase. We haven't touched tuition since 2020. We haven't touched taxes since 2019.
How much this is tax pushing?
It's very much a part of accreditation, absolutely.
So when you combine instruction of 55.2 million with academic support of 19 million, that represents 47% of the budget. Next, we see the baseline identified by expense category. So faculty salaries, 54.3 million, or 34.5% of the budget. Staff salaries, $47.7 million, or 30% of the budget. And benefits are 14.2 million. When you add up those three categories, you're close to 75% of the budget in salaries and benefits. And then you have supplies, 27.2 million, transfers, 7.5 million, travel, 1.2, equipment, $1 million, and contingency, $3.7 million. So this is the distribution of the expense categories. In the boxes you see here, you see the difference between how much is in full-time salaries and part-time salaries. It's pretty close to a 50-50 break ratio. And then over here, for staff salaries, you see the breakout between full-time and part-time and overtime.
Bill, are you getting your share of that 350?
So then, at the June 21st presentation, we had this same chart. So what has happened since, we had the opportunity to meet with the various vice presidents, and we looked at different methodology for evaluating additional needs or not. So I will tell you that the Instruction and Workforce Development has cut their budget by about $361,000, and a lower number. And then Dr. Amaya's area is lower by about $192,000. So this number is lower, and there is still ongoing review of those additional requests. So all in, it's about close to $2.95 million on additional requests. So the items that we have under critical needs are things that we don't have a choice, we have to fund. Those are increases that are passed on to us. So then, all of that updated information on projected revenues, the baseline budget, and additional requests have all been rolled into this one slide here. So what is rolled forward has been the projected revenues, 166 million. And then we talked about the baseline budget, 157.2. When you subtract the two, you get a preliminary budget surplus of 9.2 million before considering the items below. So then the critical needs of 351, when you subtract that, you have a budget surplus before additional request of 8.9. When you consider additional requests of 2.6, there is a surplus available for the biennium reserve of 6.3 in this first column that does not have a salary increase in it. So for the salary increase, for each column, you see the value of 1% and then the multiple of 1% as you go across this row here. So for a 2% is the value, for a 3%, for a 4%, and for a 5%. So what you see for the 1%, there's a surplus for biennium reserve of 5.3. For a 3% salary increase, you see a budget surplus of 3.3 million available for the biennium reserve, and so forth and so on across the different salary increase scenarios.
Okay, so it's obvious the way that you structured that slide, and then highlighted 3% that we know where we're going with this.
That's our recommendation,
So at this
Mr.
point, yeah, okay, that was my question for you then. Did you justify why you think you want 3%?
Yeah, my recommendation.
As opposed to 1 or 4? Or
Sure. No, I think it's a valid question. My recommendation of 3% is based on a combination of what we've seen across the city, or across the county with regards to school districts as well as the city, and also taking into consideration inflation is at approximately 3.2% currently. And therefore, my recommendation to the board is 3%. Now, it is a board decision, but my recommendation is 3%.
So really, I submit that this is not a salary increase, as this is a baseline adjustment.
That's correct.
Because based on those figures I just gave you, we're looking at 3+% inflation for last year. What was it, 8% for the year before?
That's correct.
And they're projecting that they hope it to get it to, they're not even going to be down to 3% this year.
That's correct.
Okay?
It really is a cost of living
So if it's a
adjustment.
COLA, then we ought to start talking about increments. If we're going to at least keep them even, and that was that was the rationale for the previous thing, so we maybe ought to talk about increments like 3.25 or 3.5. Okay, let's
think that's
do
fair.
that before we ever get out of here, because the last thing I want to do is go to a board meeting and all of a sudden have a whole new budget, a number come out that we hadn't even talked about. So do we want to look at, because they're projecting, who is this? The federal bank? Yeah, the federal bank is looking at 3.3, 3.4, okay, for upcoming, and it's now to 2.97 annual, but it's going to go, and you look at the Fed, and they don't have a clue what they're going to do in the next 90 days. So, but if we're going to cost a COLA and we want to keep people level, then I think we ought to at least have this slide adjusted to 3.25 and 3.5. If you're recommending 3 and it's a cost of living, not a salary increase, but a cost of living, then we need to look at something between at least that, or maybe a fraction thereof. But we're still suffering, okay? We're still suffering from what, 2020? Yeah, here 2022, the high rate of 8.52%. But, I mean, if you want to look at it, hey, it's not hard. The difference between 3 and 4 is, 975,000, and take half of 975,000, make it $500,000. 3.5 is roughly $500,000 more.
That's correct.
Okay.
So we were looking at 3.25, it would be 3,169,335. At 3.5, it would be 3,413,130. 3.75 would be 3,656,925, and then you have 4 there.
But what we'll do is look at the bottom line, surplus available for binding reserves. If we do everything else, that 3.384 would go down to 2.8, yada, yada, yada.
Correct.
And that would be my, if we're going to talk about COLA, this gets away from doing salary increases. You do salary based on what performance and everything else. Let's talk about COLA and do it that way.
I think that that's a fair assessment, Mr. Rexer. It really is, and when we bring a salary enhancement, it is essentially a cost of living and trying to do some sort of salary enhancement. In the past, before the pandemic, we saw inflation at about 2%. So when we would bring forward a 3%, essentially it was 2% cost of living plus a 1% increase. That's accurate. And you're absolutely correct. Currently, inflation is, even based on your charts, approximately projected to be about 3.15. I've seen 3.2 at the Federal Reserve Board meetings. So the 3% wouldn't actually cover the cost of living. That's accurate.
Value from last month, 3.27.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Are there any other questions related to the slide?
You have an Excel spreadsheet that you can pump in .035 as opposed to .03 and.
I think we got our phones here, we can do the math.
Well, his
We're
Excel.
all pretty intelligent, the difference.
Are we?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think we can subtract 3.3 and the 2.4.
Whatever your recommendation is going to be, there's enough surplus at the bottom
Yeah,
to
exactly.
whatever you direct.
But I'd recommend you look at 3.5.
Okay. That'll be it. That's an item that we'll be discussing in a few minutes, and you can bring it up at that time.
So next steps are approval of a salary enhancement by the Board of Trustees. Also, at the August 28th board meeting, we're going to be providing the certified appraisal roll for certification and acceptance by the board. Adoption of the 24-25 budget at the August 28th board meeting. Recommendation of a 2024 tax rate to the board at that meeting as well. Once the budget is approved, Ms. Davis and her staff will roll it into a banner to be available September 1. And then September 1 starts the new fiscal year. So these are a lot of condensed slides. A lot of people worked on this, and just like to show my appreciation by giving Laura Tejas, under her leadership, Guillermo Loera, who Dr. Smith poached from the budget office, and then we borrowed back, so thank you for lending him to us. And we have a brand new budget manager. She's about a month and a half old, still has a ticket on her back. And then coming out of retirement to help Laura, because Laura lost 50% of the staff this year during a critical time. Ms. Irene Nunez came out of retirement to help us. She used to be our payroll supervisor and one of our associate comptrollers, so shows we've maintained good relationships with the people that have retired. And our new AVP of Budget Financial Services, Ms. Ana Zuniga, was awesome with her revenue projections. Thank you, Ana, and her leadership. In my office, couldn't have been done without Juanita Martinez. She keeps us in line when things are due, pulls the presentations together. She does a myriad of different things, supported by Silvia De Lucio. And from somewhere in Europe, we still have our retired advisor, Ms. Jessica Shaughnessy, who we speak to on Teams periodically, and she just has awesome recommendations as usual. And Dr. Sedata, for his input to the presentation and his review of things, is awesome as well. And thank you for my cabinet colleagues for meeting 2 or 3 times as we look at additionals. And the Board of Trustees, thank you. And that concludes the presentation.
Any other questions for this young man?
Sir, when you look at the budgets and there's some cuts that are made, how do cabinet members arrive as to what they're gonna cut?
Yes. So the budget, the VPs have the availability to move funds from one place to another. So they can see a budget that may not have the need for a particular budget, and they can move part of that budget availability. So they can reallocate. That's number one. Number two, if they have vacant positions that have not been needed in the past, they can repurpose that money as well. So what Dr. Smith did, he cut $361,000 of vacant positions and reduced his additional request because he did just that. He repurposed vacant position money to new initiatives that he has going. So that's the way the VPs can repurpose and restructure their budgets.
And on the critical needs, are those going to be able to be taken care of?
Yes, ma'am. So those critical needs, we're gonna meet the budget that the CAD is now giving us. We have to. And then, so for insurance needs, we already have the new insurance premiums for next year. So we had Ruben Gallardo had estimated 192,000 in increase. So we had that on the first go around. We lowered it to 80 because we came back and we looked at what we actually need. We don't need 192. To pay the premiums for the increased insurance policy, we only need 80,000. So that's why we reduced it from 192 to 80. And then so in the IT area, Mr. Fernandez, due to escalating rates for software, increased his must be funded by 71,000 because those are passed on increases for software that we have. And then we have a small increase of about 2,500 for background checks that Ms. Field in her area identified to keep doing the background checks for people that drive vehicles. So those are items that we have to have.
And did we take a look at possibly a different increase in salaries on the positions that are needed, that we are not getting enough applicants? That's contributed possibly to the lower salaries. It's competitive when you're looking at IT or even the nursing. I know the schools are always, short of nurses, and we keep looking at those positions, but was there any consideration to having a different salary structure for those positions?
I think that's a great question, Dr. Graham, and I'm working with each of the respective cabinet members on those specific areas. So I'll give you examples that come to mind immediately. Nursing, and so we are recommending and looking, Dr. Smith and I, on adjustments. The police department, and specifically our officer ones, Dr. Maya and his team are working with me to look at that and trying to resolve that. And then programmers. Those are 3 areas specifically that come to mind, top of mind, that we are looking at potentially adjusting some of those areas, not an across the board.
And the student workers, don't forget
Yes,
those,
ma'am.
because
Student
we're,
workers.
we're way below where we should be.
Yeah, no, I won't forget the student workers, but those are specific areas as opposed to an entire department. We're gonna address those based on those specific needs, because there are no secrets to the college. If we adjust an entire department, then obviously every other department says, well, what about us? So we're looking at those specific areas where we're having a really hard time on certain areas. And I'm working with the vice presidents along with Ms. Field to address those.
And that's a difficult decision, because like you say, we adjust the salaries for IT or for nurses, and then everybody else wants an adjustment as well. But people need to understand that we have to be competitive in the positions that are.
That are the highest
yeah,
demand.
that are in
Absolutely,
high demand.
correct.
There's always the opportunity they can go back to school and get an IT degree of something.
It may
Yes.
seem picky, but because of that and salary, that's why I'd like to see that slide change to cost of living
Yeah,
adjustment.
I think that's
as opposed to
fair, sir.
Salary adjustment, because when you say salary, then all of a sudden, hey, you got this. No, everybody got the cost of living, but we're gonna talk about you, your job, and your requirements.
I think that's fair, Ms. Structure. We'll make that adjustment.
So when you considered your recommendation at 3%, is that going to be as high as the recommendation you're making for that? Because I was thinking more 4.5.
Dr. Sorrentez.
That's my recommendation, Dr. Graham, and it came into consideration based on, the large employers in our county, the school districts, the city,
Yeah, but we don't
the county.
mismanage the funds like the school districts do, excuse me. sir.
We take the management of our budget very seriously.
Yes, we do. We're very considerate.
We are. And again, we come forward with a recommendation with a full understanding that this is ultimately a board decision. And so we certainly respect, we shared the scenarios. I think Mr. Uxer, with regards to, bringing up where the rate of inflation is spot on. And obviously, my recommendation was short of the inflation rate. But we did provide the board, fair enough. But we shared with the board a significant number of recommendations, anywhere from 0 to 5%, because we understand, and we're able to manage it within the constraints of the budget. Again, because the board and the administration takes the budget very seriously, we're in a really good position.
So let me ask you this other question. When we talked last year about the salary increases, we had quite a bit of discussion about the outcomes-based, and we didn't know what it would be like, and we moved forward with a very healthy increase, but the staff delivered, or am I wrong in that?
No, I think you're right, Dr. Graham. I think that that's accurate. I think that,
I think what's accurate is the staff always delivers. What's accurate is.
So that's the more reason why we should
What's
deliver
accurate
on
is that the
increases.
figures came in that we were expecting that we didn't know when we voted last year.
that's correct.
But some of us were very willing to
Well,
put
I
our money on
know.
the staff.
Anybody that wants to go back and look at the vote can see who was, where they were last year, but
I think that that's accurate, Dr. Graham, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the cabinet in their leadership role. Dr. Smith, AVP Primizic are looking at adding programs. The board approved significant number of new programs that are high demand, high wage, that we understand. And what we've done and what I've asked the team to do is look at what student needs are, what the community needs are, and if they pay off based on outcomes, great. We're not going to offer programs that aren't going to provide students. We're not going to develop new programs that aren't going to provide a living wage. I'm not going to go forward with occupational skills awards or ICLCs that don't pay off for our students. Some of my colleagues have specifically looked at House Bill 8, and they're looking at programs that can pull in additional resources. We, as an institution, are going to do what's best for our community, our students, and the college. But Dr. Smith and his team, along AVP Primizic, they're looking at developing new occupational skills awards, as well as institutional courses leading to certificates or certifications. We're looking at a lot of work on the non-credit side that, again, provides students with living wage, but we're not going to stop focusing on degrees and certificates. Because from my perspective, that's what changes lives and generations of lives.
Well, again, my recommendation would be a 4.5.
well, we're not there yet. Well, let's get to 5.2. Let's discuss it. Read 5.2.
There you go, pal. Now we'll be there.
Item 5.2, discussion and action to approve salary increases for employees of the El Paso County Community College District for fiscal year 2024-2025.
There you go. Make your motion there, Doctor.
I make a motion that we approve a 4.5 increase for salaries.
I hear a second?
Can we go to executive to discuss for a little bit?
I don't know, we can do that in executive, can we?
Can we? If it isn't on it?
Can we discuss salary increases in executive?
You can if there's a legal issue associated with it.
That would be your call.
I don't know what the question is
The
yet.
question is there any legal question, do we have
No,
to
I
do
know
that?
your question, I don't know what her question is.
Right, no.
Yeah, what is the legal question?
The motion was to, salary increase of 4.5%. Second.
Okay. Now we get to discuss it.
Again, my position on that is, that the expectation that we had on staff, they have delivered, and I don't see why we would not go 4.5 or higher, because we have the outcomes and we have the funds.
Any other discussion? Call the question.
Mr. Mendez.
I recommend maybe that we do just 4%, okay? Not the 4.5%.
Okay, we're back to the discussion. We're calling this question, so your vote would be, you're not in agreement.
No.
So yours is no. Dr. Utzer?
Mr. Uxer?
No.
Mrs. Robles?
I'm sorry, but what is the motion? I heard motions
The
made,
motion-
but I didn't hear
the
a
motion-
second.
The
So I
motion,
don't-
Dr. Graham says is a 4.5 salary increase.
4.5 salary increase. Okay. I vote for it.
Ms. Nájera?
Aye.
Dr. Graham?
Aye.
Mr. Haggerty?
No. Do I have any other motions? Go ahead and give your
You
motion.
can make your motion.
Oh, no, I said no.
Yeah.
No, you
have
can make
any
your motion
You
to
said 4.
4%.
Oh, 4%, yeah, I motion, 4%,
So you
sorry.
make a motion for 4%.
Yes.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion?
I'd like to know the rationale for an increase. I can see a rationale of 3 or 3.5% because we base that on real numbers, that is the inflation, and we're gonna cost of living. But if we're talking about salary, then we all of a sudden, we really need to talk about contracts, evergreen, and all that other stuff. If we're gonna use the term salary and all this, okay? So if we use contract, I don't know what the contracts are, if they have a given salary, but I can bet, but just say, oh, okay, we're gonna do this because we think everybody did a good job. No.
Okay.
I mean, it's good, it's a wonderful thought, but I think, if we're gonna do a cost of living adjustment, 3.5 is warranted, 3 is your recommendation, but then I think we need to have a separate discussion on salary based on performance. And if we want to do a recommendation that we need to do across the board salary increase, a salary enhancement based on the deal that they've done good, then I'd be willing to listen to that. But if we're gonna have this, we're gonna lump everything together just because we have lots of money, no.
It's not lots of money, it's the performance outcomes are there. It's not just because we have a lot of money, it's because they delivered on
You
what.
just got through saying that we have all the money to do it,
We have money to do it.
okay?
If we were in the red, then that, of course, wouldn't make any sense,
If
but
we're
we're
gonna use
not.
the rationale we have the money, then let's go use all the money. I mean, if we
The
do that, then
rationale I
we-
used was that they delivered, the staff delivered on the
We're
outcomes.
discussing. Any other discussion?
I have a question. What?
All right, we have a motion and a
Hold on real
second.
quick. Let me ask something real quick. So, on these, you obviously put 4% and 5%. I'm assuming that's because we could still have money left over for what we need, and we would still be okay at an increase of 4 or 5% if we have.
Yes,
it.
ma'am.
Read the chart.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I can read the chart.
Well-
And I don't ask half as many questions as you do, and it's a question that is valid, and I would like to ask it.
You're more than welcome to do that.
Thank
I
you.
understand.
Thank you for your permission.
You're welcome. Feel free to ask me anytime.
Any other discussion? Okay, we have a motion of 4% with a second. Call the question, Bill.
Mr. Mendez?
Yay.
Mr. Uxer?
No.
Mrs. Robles?
I thought we already voted.
We did, but it didn't pass, so we have a new
Was this
one.
another-
4%.
But we have a motion on the floor,
It's-
and we're
4%.
voting, and now we have another motion on the floor. What
No.
happened to the first one?
It
Did we
failed.
defeat it?
But then,
Yeah.
but then the last
Yeah.
motion failed, so now we have a new
4.5
motion.
Failed.
Right, so he made this motion,
So
I
he
seconded
made-
it. This is the second motion.
This is for 4%.
Okay,
Is that a yes?
yes.
Okay.
Ms. Nájera,
Yes.
Dr. Graham,
No.
Mr. Haggerty.
Yes. Did it pass?
It did.
No? It did. What were the ayes?
Yes.
Okay, it passed, okay. All right, read 5.3 there, Mel.
Item 5.3, the Board of Trustees and Dr. William Zapata, College President, will discuss other budget considerations for fiscal year 2024-2025.
Okay, Doctor.
Judge, I think we've already discussed them all.
All right. Okay, is there any reason why we need to go into executive session? Do you have anything for us in executive session, Counsel?
No, we need your signature on an item out of executive session.
Okay, well, we can do that. All right, so, if all of the items are done, we are in adjournment.
Thank you all.